Hey there, welcome to episode 114 of the Cafe Genius Impresarios audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at about 11:30 in the morning on May 2nd, 2025. That's Friday. Woo. As usual, Cafe Genius Impresarios is published on Fridays, so recording same day. Today we're going to talk about critical mass and how that applies to our entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem. If you are not familiar, if this is the first time you're joining us here on the Cafe Genius Impresarios audio program, quick background: Cafe Genius Impresarios. Cafe with two F's is a bit of an homage to the Cafe Centro, a small, cute coffee shop that was located in South Park, San Francisco. It's very near what is now the Oracle Ballpark. Used to be the AT&T Ballpark, whatever it was before that. Things are always changing. And it was known as where startups start, as the coffee shop where startups start. It was indeed spelled with two F's, Cafe Centro, where of all things, Twitter was sort of brought to light, I suppose. There's maybe some story details that are lost in the shuffle, but essentially Jack Dorsey would sit at Cafe Centro with his laptop, about to ruin the world. Unfortunately, Cafe Centro did not survive all the way back in the post-pandemic era, so it had closed, I want to say about a year ago now, over a year maybe. So there it is, Cafe with two F's, production by a street. Genius, homage to the Genius Lunches, formerly held during the Downtown Project, a gathering now and then, a very loose-knit group of people, usually friend of a friend kind of thing, to talk about who's working on what's up, what's down, etc., etc. I think these should come back if there is indeed a so-called startup scene. But somewhere in the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem, there should be a few genius lunches going on. Finally, impresario, spelled with two S's, a rare but valid spelling. Impresarios are, in our case, people who are making things happen. Entrepreneurs, innovators, entrepreneurial innovators, or anyone else, really. If you're doing cool stuff, if you're doing stuff, that's you. That's us. Cafe Genius Impresarios. Sometimes an interview program, more often, an audio essay.
I'm not quite sure how
Computer, stop. Who knows? Amazon products are junk. More often an audio essay program wherein I share my views and opinions based on my time in Silicon Valley and my time. I think we're almost at parity, right? 7. Yeah. We're coming up on an equal number of years in Silicon Valley and Las Vegas. I will be in Vegas for 12 years in August. I was in Silicon Valley 2 sessions with a little break between. So 93 to 2001, 2005 to 2013. So that's 8 and 16. That's not even close. It feels like it. Is it 16, 15? Something like that. Oh well. We're coming up on parity. Well, I mean 12 is pretty close. It's close enough. I'm no longer in Vegas for 2 or 3 years, just figuring stuff out. Anyway, we do talk about the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem of the greater Vegas area, and hopefully we do speak to some of those impresarios about what is going on. Hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which includes the show notes, a summary, which I will read, and several links. There's only a few. The 4 shameless self-promotion links, which I need to consolidate a little bit. I don't want to keep reading the same links over and over. It sounds annoying, I'm sure, over week, especially if you happen to listen to all of my audio programs. And there are 3 links, 2 of them regarding the nuclear test, or the Nevada test site, which was used for nuclear testing. Critical mass, see where that works, and then a link for critical mass. So let's get started so we can get finished and move on to the weekend. Because if you're working on your startup, tomorrow's just another day. The summary of today's episode is, while this topic can apply anywhere to a variety of scenarios, the low-hanging fruit in the greater Vegas region, famously connected to development of nuclear stuff a few decades ago at the Nevada test site, where critical mass was a very important thing to be aware of. It may also matter when it comes to the development of economic diversity in Greater Vegas, which is something to think about. The links for today's episode. You are under no obligation to spend any money at the shameless self-promotion links. You may visit the buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo profile for links and information, biographical information, and so on. It's a free-form profile. You may also listen to the Buy Me an Update Monday morning somewhere. Every Monday, I publish a 5-minute or less microcast, a quick summary of the previous week's audio program episodes and any news announcements in the upcoming week. 5 minutes or less. Can't beat that. And the next pair, so that's buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo/posts, hosted exclusively on buymeacoffee.com. That's the Buy Me an Update microcast. Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. That's the hyphen is the usually next to the 0 key on your keyboard. That's where it is on mine. The Ko-fi.com website also famously a place where you might support creators, open source developers, other interesting people, and also me if you like. But you can, I use these tools, and you can also use these tools for engagement, connection, communication. In my case, I just share small updates. So ko-fi.com/DanHugo and the Ko-fi coffee. I know it's meant to be coffee. I just pronounce it differently to make sure you realize it's an unusual spelling. Coffee Solo, ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/DanHugo/posts is a non-periodic, non-specific topic audio program, totally freeform, can go anywhere in any direction at any time. I think I've posted 3 episodes so far, so check that out if you like. It's a precursor to Hugo Floss making a proper return, since that will be a similar format. A link to the Nevada test site Wikipedia page, if you're curious about nuclear testing and the facilities and whatnot. Kind of a big deal here. It leaves Southern Nevada with a lot of nuclear physicists and other smart people from decades gone by. It still exists. It's now called the Nevada National Security Site, NNSS.gov. So that's the next link. You can figure out what that is if you're curious. And if you look around for Nevada test site, you'll find other links and articles and photos and so on. So the Wikipedia page links to a few external links like that. You'll find more. Finally, critical mass. It's a Wikipedia page about what critical mass is, the technical definition. We'll talk about that a tiny bit, but I am not a nuclear physicist, so I'm not going to be trying to educate anyone on this, just why I'm using the term. So let's start off with that. Let's start off with the atomic kind of critical mass. So we are speaking of people, but let's touch on what an atomic critical mass is, since I made the allusion. That's allusion with an A. I think the best, easy to understand examples I have seen to explain this use ping pong balls on mouse traps. Yeah, already a party. You can search for this if you like. Basically, if you have some number of mouse traps spread out on a floor or a table with a ping pong ball resting on each mousetrap, and you toss a ping pong ball into the field, wherever you've placed these, if the ping pong ball hits a mousetrap, it will trip the mousetrap, launching another ping pong ball. If that one hits another mousetrap, same thing, and so on. Now, I think, if I'm remembering my physics correctly, there can be more than one neutron. I think there's an average of 2 or something like that. So it's not quite a direct analogy, but you get the idea that as long as one ping pong ball hits another mousetrap with another ping pong ball, that ping pong ball has a chance to do the same. So you end up with this chain reaction. It isn't completely accurate, but it's close enough. It illustrates the basic idea. If you have a critical mass of mousetraps, there is a good enough chance the ping pong ball will hit one of and the chain reaction will follow. So am I repeating myself? Yes, like ping pong balls hitting mousetraps. Without enough traps, less than critical mass, there is less a chance that the chain reaction will continue. It will just stop. The ping pong ball will bounce where there's no mousetrap because there's not, statistically, just not a high enough chance that there would have been one there. The chain reaction probably ends. It could bounce and it could hit another one, but the odds start falling off. It is a visually interesting demonstration which illustrates the difference between the right number of traps and too few traps. So the critical mass or below critical mass. Not that we need to get into COVID or disease transmission in general. That's maybe another episode, but there is a similar thing you could examine. The old R naught, if you remember, the R naught from a few years ago, the transmission factor, which, by the way, for measles is about 15. It's between 12 and 18. And for COVID, it was about 2. It's an indication of how likely some number of people are going to be infected if they are proximal to a person who is infected. So it indicates how quickly a disease can move through a population if you're close to each other. So that is kind of interesting. Is that we used to we used to hear of you have to put a mask on if you're outside. It doesn't matter. Basically, I'm not an immunologist, virologist, or epidemiologist, but just from doing my own research, the factors are essentially the volume that you're in. So if you're outside, the volume is basically infinite, right? The universe is an infinite heat sink and all that. So the volume, the enclosed volume in which you find yourself, the time for which you are in that volume, and the prevalence of disease in a population. So if you are in a room by yourself, the prevalence is whatever it is for you. If you're in a room with 100 people, and it's shoulder to shoulder, like you're in a subway car or train, bus, public transit, or a small room, and half the people are infected, then that's you're very proximal, but you're in a small volume for any length of time, and the prevalence of disease is 50%. So there's a pretty good chance. So the critical mass is kind of similar, because if you are in a small space, and it's a critical mass, obviously, the mass is measured with things that are together. The demon core, for example, could not have been a demon core if it was the size of a room. It had to be the size of like a softball. If you don't know what that is, you can look that up too. I think there's a picture of it on the critical mass Wikipedia page. So having people close together with something to transmit to someone else, as long as they're together for a certain amount of time, that's the take home. Now we don't have to talk about disease anymore. Let's talk about sharing ideas. How about a critical mass of entrepreneurial innovators? The last number I came across for population of Clark County was still placing it somewhere around 2.3 or 2.4 million people. I don't know if that's like an estimate based on move in, move out ratio, basic accounting, or if they've done another population survey. The census, of course, was 5 years ago now, almost. So that number was about 2.3, 2.2 or 2.3, memories. But I thought it would have been 2.5 million by now, since there's been a lot of talk of how many people are moving into the greater Vegas area, Clark County. So the fact that it's still 2.3, 2.4, 2.3 something is mildly shocking. It's at least surprising. This might be a critical mass for something, depending on what we're talking about. So maybe having 2.3 million people in a county is either just enough or not quite enough. Maybe it's too many. Suppose we draw a curvy line around what we consider to be our entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem. Some people might think that's the startup scene. That's slightly different. The startup scene is contained within the ecosystem, most likely. So through some sort of rolling introspective survey, perhaps we would be able to figure out where people are generally, and we'd be able to then create an enclosing, I believe it's a manifold, but a curvy polygon. We could determine where more people are who consider themselves a part of this population and where fewer are. So you'd end up with like little sections within the overall ecosystem where there are more people, more proximal entrepreneurs or innovators or entrepreneurial innovators. The bounding curve might have almost nobody at its edges, and that's fine. In fact, we'll put some slack in so that production by a street. So wherever the outermost people, the most distal of the entrepreneurial innovators are, will buffer a little bit. So the curvy will be a little bit larger than the actual ecosystem, because we're not really concerned so much with specific latitudes and longitudes, or longitudes and latitudes, if you like correctly ordering points. We're not overly concerned with precise locations, though. We're just generally curious how vast our ecosystem is. We can make a simplifying assumption that these people can move around within the bounded shape, of course, and that they will likely move toward centroids, that is, points that are located in the middle of little groupings. So they might meet up at coffee shops or co-work spaces, maybe offices or studios or lab spaces, wherever collaboration and or socializing might occur. And so the presumption is that whatever the curvy shape is of the ecosystem, people will move toward its center or local centroids of small groups, subgroups. And like I said, they'll meet in like a common, easy to get to places that are, acceptable to everyone, trying to sort of balance the amount of distance people have to travel. You don't want to have a meetup of everyone. I can walk to the location. How about you? Well, I got to drive 25 miles. That's usually a recipe for the end of collaboration. Since humans are not ping pong balls, as far as we know, we should be looking at ideas and motivation passing between people in similar ways as disease does. Although it's a little bit better, I think, except in a good way. So if we have a large enough population of humans moving around, proximal at least sometimes, so in some volume for some amount of time, there might be a stronger possibility that an idea will move from one person to another and some little quantum of light, probably blue, will be emitted, the aha moment. And this could continue. The same could be said of introductions and network connections, of referrals for jobs or expertise, and who knows what else. The theory, if you have a critical mass of entrepreneurial innovators milling about, their collisions now and then will likely lead to amplification of any ideas or possibilities, and more aha moments, and who knows what else. So the more likely you run into another entrepreneur, another innovator, another entrepreneurial innovator, the more likely that you'll strike up a conversation, or that you'll notice something that, oh, what is that you're working on? Or, hey, would you like to see what I'm working on? So the more likely that happens, the more often that happens in a volume that offers proximity and a length of time that sort of encourages this communication. It could be a mixer where there's explicitly the expectation that you're going to be talking to people of a similar interest. Then ultimately you may find, oh, I'm also working on that. Oh, that's interesting. Do you know so-and-so also working on? So all manner of collision may occur. And, I'm glad how did I run into you? Who knew we would end up talking about the same things? Collisions. Speaking of collisions, you may or may not be aware of the Downtown Project and the notion of serendipitous collisions. The late Tony Hsieh was convinced that bringing more varied personalities into proximity for long enough periods of time would lead to some things interesting. Thus, the geographical configuration of the Downtown Project, which I guess was shaped like a llama from above, and the notion that bringing people there, like come to downtown Vegas and start your startup, bringing all these people together in casual socializing scenarios would lead to, well, serendipity. Basically those aha moments, but sort of happening organically. When I first arrived in the Vegas area and first encountered the Downtown Project, and then shortly after I began working for Intel, so I was never really full-time a part of anything connected to the Downtown Project. I always refer to myself as a spectator. But I will say that there were often planned events and socializing occasions, the Downtown Lowdown, the Work in Progress meetup, even the Downtown Podcast, which was sort of either directly or adjacent to this general notion of let's just have meetups and people can just join in. So it wasn't like a software developer meetup, or it wasn't like a sales company. It wasn't specific verticals. It was just come on down, see what's going on. You're trying to pursue some sort of entrepreneurial endeavor, so you're kind of in already, and so on. So the idea was to bring people closer together for these serendipitous collisions. I would often say this scheme, that serendipity is a great idea. Sounds very nice, but it isn't really a business plan. There was always a chance, of course, but looking back at the time of the downtown project, I think there was way too much handed over to serendipity, especially if various Tony fans were coming and going while those who were actually trying to make a startup idea go may not have had the notion in mind to be proactive part of the ecosystem. So what I mean by that is the downtown project itself received a lot of attention. There would be people visiting. There were tours of it as though it were a spectacle. I would hear one of my favorite quotes from someone trying to pursue a startup. I said, "Hey, I never see," and again, remember, I'm a spectator, right? So I'm spending my free time, occasionally, frequently actually, my weekend in Vegas because of the way my travel schedule was for when I was working at Intel and hackathons and other events, and time spent at other Intel sites working on products in the maker space. So my weekends would occasionally be in the middle of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday-ish. And I believe the Work in Progress community dinner was on Wednesday, maybe. And I think the Downtown podcast was recorded. It was either Tuesday or Wednesday. The Downtown podcast was recorded after that. So you could very easily go hang out at the Work in Progress co-work space, wander over to the Ogden and catch a recording of a Downtown podcast episode weekly. And then you could hang out with whoever was there at the Gold Spike or whatever. So there was always like sort of spontaneous, reasonably organic collisions, if you like. But I will tell you, it was very rare that they actually materialized into something positive. So anyway, the reason I was saying all this was there was always some socializing, social gatherings, social engagements, sort of setting up these serendipitous collisions even. Occasionally there would be, again, those friends or people who've heard, oh, I came from wherever else. I heard about this downtown project thing. I wanted to check it out. So I would speak to actual entrepreneurs who were pursuing their dreams. I'd say, hey, I never see you at these things. And they said, right, I'm working on my startup. So the question is, do people proactively pursuing their entrepreneurial innovation dreams, do they have the time to engage enough in potential serendipitous collisions to actually be a part of that critical mass? Yes, they're proximal by nature, they're in a similar geography, at least sometimes, but are they actually a part of the neutrons floating around? I actually believe the serendipity should have come more often from people being proximal for longer periods of time, like living on campus in college, for example, people in a dormitory. They will run into each other all the time, and they run into each other in classrooms. They run into each other at the library, walking to and from classes. Maybe they're sharing study halls or other sort of or focused attention sessions. And if you live in the dorm with each other, if you live in your fellow classmates, you may actually be running into them all the time in the dining hall or at restaurants or anywhere. So you just generally run into people more frequently. And then you tend to have an awareness of what they're working on and vice versa. With people actually pursuing their endeavors downtown, rather than visiting, coming by to have a look or make a speech or whatever, so the tour groups, crossing paths frequently with the classmate-like familiarity actually would make a difference. There may have been more of this than I observed myself as a spectator back then. So a retrospective may find out in more detail, among other facets of a startup city or neighborhood, whether this is the sort of thing that would qualify as a serendipitous collision. So is it showing up for events and kind of forcing serendipitous collisions, or is it literally walking down the street as a proxy for a campus, walking along down, I don't know, pick a street, Fremont East, to this sort of right down the center, and seeing someone across the street, oh, hey, how's it going? Hey, how's your project coming? Or do you have a demo tomorrow? Or, like you're familiar with what people are working on. Similar to, oh, do you have the class notes from yesterday's lecture? Just that level of interaction is indicating an awareness of we're all in this together, sort of. You're working on your thing, I'm working on my thing, but we never have time to do all this fun stuff that people keep talking about. I would wonder if the people that have the time to hang out all the time are actually pursuing a real startup, or if they're just trying to be proximal. Maybe they'll get hit by a stray neutron and something will happen. And again, a retrospective might be exactly what we need to kind of get some feedback about that. So somebody really should do a retrospective of the downtown project. I will comment now on the Silicon Valley ecosystem. I was in Silicon Valley from 1993 to 2001, so that's about 8 years, and then 2005 to 2013, so that is also about 8 years. So I don't know where I got approximately 12. I just can't do math. I took a break in the middle there. I went, it was ill-timed, as it was with regard to working and life in general. Ill-timed as it was, sorry. The emphasis matters there. I moved back to Phoenix area in August of 2001, and if you may or may not recall, 2001, around September timeframe, was a bit of a game changer. And while there was a difference between the two blocks of time, it was more a matter of amplitude, not frequency. What does that mean? Now, what would be known as the dot-com boom started around 1993, maybe 1994, coincident with my moving to Silicon Valley, perhaps, and the number of startups and big companies and the number of skilled entrepreneurial and innovative people exploded over the next 6 years or so. So 1993 to, 94 to 2000, right? It's kind of right in the middle there. With actual meetups and gatherings all over the place. And of course, people running into each other at workplaces that tended to grow rather quickly. The do you know anyone recruiting method was in overdrive. So there was always, hey, give me your resume, or hey, do you know anybody that wants to join this? Or hey, what are you working on? Are they hiring? Do they need so-and-so? So running into more people and having these kinds of conversations increase the likelihood that you'd be able to grow a startup, that you'd be able to staff a new endeavor, that you'd be able to change jobs, right? So either you're looking for someone to work with you or at your startup, you're looking to leave where you are and go work at a different, maybe you're a startup person. Maybe you're looking for a big company job. Hey, we're looking to buy a house. So I'm looking for a more stable full-time position at an established company. Oh yeah, maybe you should go to, pick one. Maybe you can go work at Philips or Oracle, Apple down the street. So connecting with friends and former colleagues for the next big thing on either side of that connection was kind of a part of the machinery. Cross-pollination between cubicles, departments, companies, and cities even. You could be in the East Bay, the South Bay, the Peninsula, North Bay. Connecting between all these places, people became more and more par for the course, as more people might know someone for a particular role, or might know a couple of people who might be interested in starting a company. Like, hey, do you hate where you're working? You want to start something new? And that was a real thing. To say that there was critical mass would be an understatement. There's well beyond critical mass. It was closer to Castle Bravo than Trinity. Quick history. Trinity was the first fission detonation in New Mexico. Castle Bravo was a miscalculated fusion reaction. I think it was, if I'm remembering correctly, 15 times more powerful than they calculated, and it was already many times more powerful than the Trinity explosion. So the fusion weapon, the fission fusion weapon, Castle Bravo in the Bikini Atoll area was ridiculous, and by all accounts, a bit of a game changer itself. So the difference, yes, you can have a critical mass, or you can have so much that you wipe out islands. That's not funny. Even for that second tour of duty, though, it took a while to reconnect with various people and to redevelop some of the momentum. So this was my second tour in 2005 to 2013. But given the 9/11 changes to the world, my second block in the Valley was just as educational and interesting. It was just different, and I would never go back for a third. That's how much I learned. When I say amplitude versus frequency, it was because I had to kind of start over. I reconnected with some people that I met the first time I was there, but it was the post 9/11 window of time, so things were just kind of returning. Eventually, they would return to where things were, and arguably that's happening yet again. So don't count Silicon Valley out. Those people are nuts. They will always find some new thing to work on, and it's interesting when you do reflect on the fact that Silicon Valley's innovation culture is not 10 years old. It's not 30 years old. It's closer to 150 years old. So they didn't just get started doing this last week, but I would not go back. So we should be making a greater Vegas. I've touched on this topic a few times. It is possible to is it possible? Can I read my own writing? Luckily, it's not handwritten. Is it possible to simply conjure Silicon Valley somewhere within Greater Vegas? Can we just keep saying it and it will just be true? I will cut to the chase and say no. I think I'm fairly consistent on that. And if you are curious, you should venture back to episode 85 of this audio program, the title Vegas as the Next, ellipsis, Vegas, which dives into the long and evolutionary cultivation of innovation culture in the Bay Area, where Silicon Valley would emerge from what one might describe as serendipity. Maybe this played a role in the application of a similar idea in downtown Las Vegas. Tony Hsieh was a startup person in the Bay Area for a time, though it is important to know that the evolution of this culture in the Bay Area began with the gold rush in the mid-1800s. Really, the Links episode 85 includes some of this information, and you can check that out. In fact, there's a presentation by someone at Stanford, and the label of the link is like Stanford. It doesn't even talk about Frederick Terman, but it talks about the gold rush and selling picks and shovels and telegraph and radio tube technologies and this general sort of energy in the air of the Bay Area, of people just becoming intellectually curious. And Professor Fred Terman was a product of that. Eventually the dean of engineering at Stanford and the so-called father of Silicon Valley, although I don't think he buys into that as much, kind of just a normal person. And like I said, the presentation from the Stanford person who does the kind of walk down Silicon Valley memory lane, I should say, he doesn't really go into that either. So some might view Terman as a factor, not the father of. I think he would agree. But there's a lot of stuff. It isn't just the .com in 1993. It started happening a long way back. The idea that I've been hearing about for about 5 years now, basically a little bit before and most definitely after the pandemic, is that the Greater Vegas area needs to be more like, and now it must be the next Silicon Valley. There is some belief that this can happen if it's just repeated often enough. Just keep posting on LinkedIn and it'll be true. But even if there are a few buildings built and if some capital becomes available, there's a missing piece, namely the critical mass of people, and by extension, a culture for those people to take energy and connection from. So that innovation culture doesn't exist without the people, and merely having people hanging around, you can create an entire oasis in the desert with a fun economy if you have people. Do you automatically get Silicon Valley because you say so? My view is you do not. We don't have 150 years of innovation culture to lean on, and we don't have the talent pool coming out of multiple high-powered educational power plants, Berkeley, Stanford, Santa Clara University, San Jose State, even San Luis Obispo down in, San Luis Obispo, but right near the 5, where the 152 and the 5 are, somewhere down there. The colleges of the North. I mean, there were a lot of educational institutions, and when I read an article about the roots of Silicon Valley being in some academic institutions, even my school, way down in LA, Harvey Mudd College, was listed as one of the major contributing sources of brain power plants, perhaps. Educational power plants are a component of it. We don't have this tendency of the people. We don't have the tendency of the people we do have to want to be a part of some out-of-the-box possibilities. So what I mean is there isn't this natural, hey, that's something I don't know about. Let me be involved and learn more and jump into this. Hackathons, challenges, meetups for pursuing startups and so on. These all happen here, but they're not filling up rooms. I don't know if what I said earlier was clear, but because I kind of stepped on my own sentence, but we simply don't have the same sort of leaning into the unknown. Not everyone. I am not saying that we have nobody, But the 1990 principle I have talked about before is something that usually gets a nod of agreement when I discuss this with my Vegas brain trust connections. So the 1990, that's one, well, in case you have not heard this population ratio in a previous episode, because I have talked about it quite a bit, that's 1% of the group of the startup scene are leaders. Let's say the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem, make it a little bit bigger. 1% are leaders driving entrepreneurial and or innovation efforts. 9% are interested in what the 1% are doing, what they're up to. And 90% are spectators. If you do happen to flip through some of that info about fission and critical mass, you will see the need for energy, and in particular, well, to get started. So energy has to move through the system, and it happens to produce a lot of extra. And that's where you get the bright lights and the boom. And in particular, some fast-moving neutrons, but also slow-moving neutrons. High energy to kick off the fission and maybe convert uranium to plutonium and generally break up some atoms. Slow-moving thermal neutrons to sustain a stable reaction. We can map this to a critical mass of entrepreneurs and innovators in our ecosystem with some creative license. So let's suppose, if we're going to make that direct comparison, the direct analogy to critical mass, those fast-moving neutrons are our 1%. They are aiming high and they want to make things happen. They might not be willing to wait for others to get out of their way. They may go around or over or under. They want to see enablement, not obstruction. They are the entrepreneurs. They are the innovators, the entrepreneurial innovators. Maybe some enablers in government and working with and those working with capital sources to make more capital available, to more proactively engage the entrepreneurial ecosystem to be able to provide funding, maybe to work more closely with the innovators in the ecosystem, and especially the entrepreneurial innovators. They will make noise and will get the ball rolling more than once. They are essential. However, and we'll get a water. How to get a little water there. As I used to say of the Downtown Project, you cannot invite only the entrepreneurs or the entrepreneurial innovators to be proximal. What you end up with, and I actually saw this happen once or twice. Does anybody here want to work at my startup? Well, you fill the room with the 1%. It doesn't have to be exactly 1%, but it works in the metaphor. So if you fill the room with 1%, they're all busy. They're all doing their thing. So the slow-moving neutrons are the 9%, the people who are going to participate in the new ideas, the innovative endeavors, the grind, if you like, to convert ideas into action. They are also the people getting the word out, the people who open their coffee shops after hours to host special gatherings, co-work, presentation, outside the box thinking. They don't just have a venue, they're going above and beyond. The students who take part in hackathons, maybe even people producing podcasts each week. Although I think I'm in the 1%, but who knows? So the 9%, those slow-moving neutrons, that's what makes for a sustainable chain reaction. That's the group of people who really enable forward progress, a brighter light to shine, a lot of energy release, right? So you need the 1%, you need the 9%. You need more of the 9%. Well, that's why the numbers are like that. And finally, the spectators, the people who might be neither entrepreneurial nor innovative, might not be those in the same realm you're looking at. So, as I repeat often, you do not need to be creating the next TikTok or Netflix to be an entrepreneur, nor to be innovative. You can be one or both of these in any number of ways. As I often say, if you and your startup co-founders are meeting in a new restaurant to discuss your venture, and maybe you're in the tech, you might be meeting inside a startup, just not the same kind you're working on. So when I say 1990, I mean the spectators are not necessarily enabling the development of a new technology, the development of a new manufacturing sector, the development of new novel things. New and novel, same meaning. But when it comes to opening a retail establishment, opening a new kind of services business, opening a new entertainment venue, they may be in the 1%, they may be in the 9%. Right? So I don't necessarily mean that someone is always 100% spectator all the time. What I do mean is in the context of any particular vertical or in this case, the curvy shape of the entrepreneurial innovator ecosystem, we may reflexively think, oh, okay, if you're not building a startup in the tech arena, if you're not trying to build that next TikTok, whatever. But again, we may need to go meet somewhere. Oh, I run a couple of co-work spaces here. I'm part of the 9% when it comes to infrastructure. I'm a spectator when it comes to developing actual startups and technology and so on, but I'm a part of the infrastructure that enables this and makes it go. So it's not so cut and dried. So when I make that 1990 simplification, it depends on the context. Finally, the problem I see, and which I've described before, is we don't have the critical mass. And we may not have the requisite number of high or low energy neutrons moving around Greater Vegas for the things that we think we have them for, to be the next Silicon Valley, for example. So we find the same people showing up for the same events, the same lack of recognition and celebration across the region of all the different entrepreneurial and innovative efforts and possibilities, and too much attention paid to celebrities and people who made their money standing on the shoulders of giants in Silicon Valley, or maybe elsewhere, who believe gentrifying this area is their next step to gather up more wealth. So to put that another way, we have a few people who get a lot of attention because they're a celebrity. Maybe they used to be in a boy band and now they're into weightlifting and making mediocre movies, driving a Hollywood 2.0 effort. Or maybe it's somebody who made their money in San Francisco and got robbed. His home got robbed. So I'll move to Vegas and I'll invite all my friends who don't actually live here to come and we can talk about how to extract wealth or build up our own wealth. I don't know how much wealth they'll extract, but we can get people to move from Silicon Valley to Nevada and they'll save a ton of money on housing. They will gentrify the area, but who cares about that? Meanwhile, the fun economy has a trademark, and it is the stable kind of anchor. If Silicon Valley is tech development, moving fast and breaking things and other horrible ideas, Vegas has the fun economy. There are other things. Will there be a tech ecosystem? Sure, there already is. Will there be a bio ecosystem? Sure, there already is. Will there be a media production, perhaps a big studio ecosystem? Maybe. They're certainly talking about building some sites and getting some tax credits and whatnot. So don't count any of these things out, but do be aware that if you have people, if you have resources, infrastructure to enable a particular pursuit, if somebody said, is there a critical mass of bartenders in Vegas? Probably. Is there a critical mass of service industry? Yes. Is there a critical mass of culinary expertise? Probably. There's certainly a powerful union to gather those people together and look out for them. Is there a critical mass of software engineers? Maybe, maybe not. Some people don't have to move to Vegas to participate in the local economy. They don't have to be physically here to be considered a component of the critical mass, but it does make something of a difference. So that is something to explore on its own. Bottom line, though, is there critical mass? It's hard to say unless we do some sort of rolling introspection, which I've talked about previously. And if people realize that they can and should cross paths, they should run into each other. They should locate those slow-moving neutrons and make sure they get bumped into now and then. Not everybody has to be recruiting you to work on their startup, but there is that general energy. There's stuff going on. And if you cross paths frequently with people doing things, I sometimes call it the second scene, the second startup scene, where you don't have to say, oh, it's the third Saturday of the month. It must be time to go get free food and talk about whatever again. There should be that energy present that brings people together here and there, passing each other on the streets, meeting up, like not meeting up, but running into each other in a coffee shop or in a, I don't know if you know what these are, library. The library should be making a comeback as a co-work space, in my opinion. Lots and lots of possibilities. But critical mass to be the next Silicon Valley, I don't see that happening anytime soon. But to be a better Vegas, guess what? Everybody's already here. And that is where I'm going to leave today's episode. Thank you, as always, for listening. And hey, why don't you participate? Maybe if you're starting something, we should get some ideas rolling again. Maybe the return of the Genius Lunch. Maybe get that second scene really more formalized. And by that, I mean have more people understand that they can just go and be outside and interact with other people. They don't have to look at their calendar first. And finally, let's be more visible. Let's make sure that people who are doing cool things, who are trying to do cool things, get some attention. Make sure that the younger people that are participating in hackathons and challenges get recognition and celebration of their achievements. Make sure we all get to see what's going on so that we know we're not sitting here thinking, am I in the right place? Thanks for listening. Take care.